big pharma are really trying to figure out today what AI means to them, how to minimize the threat to them and their structures, and how to ramp up and include AI into their DNA as they keep on moving forward. And it's complicated. I mean, it's not straightforward for these big companies to change such a fundamental way of doing things, suddenly using technology and data points.
I'm Sarah Nagle. I've spent my career leading research and product development within some of the world's largest brands.
And I'm Chad Reynolds. I'm a serial entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Verve.
And this is AI Powered by People.
Each episode will dive into the latest AI developments and talk to an industry leader to help you better understand and utilize AI.
We'll take you inside some of the world's most famous companies and share examples of how AI is improving innovation, consumer engagement, media, and marketing.
No matter what industry you work in, we'll help you navigate one of the biggest disruptions to organizations and people today.
Hey, Chad, how are you doing? You're just back from Germany.
I'm doing great, fully recovered. And it was an awesome trip, and we actually had 8 hours in Paris for a layover. So instead of spending time at the airport, we got a chance to go out and just see how the city was prepping for the Olympics, and got all the girls like Olympic shirts, and
awesome.
We're fully stocked up for opening ceremonies. So it was a really great trip.
We do have a story about the Olympics, but first I want to talk about the interview we're going to be sharing today with Kjell De Orr, who's the CEO and founder of the Bridges Group, the Seven Bridges Group, and executive director of the Co-Creation Lab in Miami, which was created in collaboration with MIT. So getting back to the Olympics, there's going to be an AI version of Al Michaels that will deliver Olympic recaps on Peacock. They're calling it your daily Olympic recap, and it's going to be on the app. You can provide your name, picked up to 3 types of sports that you're interested in, and up to 2 types of highlights. And then each morning you'll get an Al Michaels led rundown. What do you think about this? What's your take on it?
I mean, I love the idea of it. I think anytime you can customize experiences for people to catch up on it, I think is awesome. I think hearing it in his voice is great. I'm sure they're putting all these limiters around it just to treat it more like a thing that gets processed kind of overnight as opposed to real time, just to put some guardrails around it. But I think this is a step in the right direction for how people want to consume content, but still have the voice of Al Michaels. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm curious how you think this could it backfire? Is there any way that it could backfire?
Well, I think that's what they're putting on rails. So
but do we know that?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you have to pick, you can only have these this many sports. You can only have these kinds of highlights. Then it would seem that they're pre-processing all these.
Yeah.
Do it, essentially process it overnight. There's like a workflow, process it overnight, and then run it through an algorithm to score, make sure it's not saying, bad things. You can put a bunch of filters and different things on top of it to evaluate it before it gets launched. But it's not real time, right?
Yeah. And they are time boxing it for the Olympics. So it seems like it's almost like a pilot to test out what's happening. What do you think the impact this could have on other industries? So like outside of the Olympics, like thinking about news or, other forms of entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, it's been happening for, I don't know the last decade. Like you open up your feed and it's all personalized to you of the stories. So this is no different in the format of it. I think the only net new thing is just having Al Michaels voiceover that update.
Yeah.
So it's no different than if I open my phone and, Siri's reading off kind of the top stories from today. It's just, this feels a little bit more manual.
Yeah.
Like you have to tell it what you're interested in, and it's going to do it. This is what people want to have.
Yeah.
Or I guess we're going to see if it's what they want to have.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I was talking to Steve, our producer, right before this, and he was just talking about how, what impact could this have on new broadcasters, like new voices in journalism. If Val Michaels is going to be, doing this and, he's at the latter half of his career, you just have a voice. He doesn't know he's like in Florida somewhere, kicking back as like his voice is giving recaps. What impact does this have on, people that are entering this industry?
Why don't we ask Steve? So Steve, you mind jumping in?
Sure. In my previous life, I was a young, aspiring sportscaster, and I looked up to people like Al Michaels, right, and Bob Costas. Al Michaels needs no more money. He can do whatever he wants. So he'll take the money, and we'll see how this does with his voice. But if this works, right, it'll take off in every other industry, right? We'll see, why do we need another Brad Pitt? Right? We can de-age him. We can take his voice. We can take his image. We can put him in other movies. Why do we need another person in a commercial when we've got Morgan Freeman's voice? Like, we'll just take his voice because everyone loves it, start putting that in everything. My fear is we're going to see it with all these people who we love now, specifically with voice, because you both know how easy that is. My fear is that we're going to see a lot of young, aspiring people who want to reach that level to lose that opportunity.
So Steve, for this specific execution though, it's purely just recaps. I think for Al Michaels, what everybody knows, who has that voiceover over top of the updates, is a way to package it. Like, you can't be everywhere at the same time. A way to package it. So what's the stretch from kind of that very limited experience to it, I guess, replacing getting discovered in the industry? It's a pretty big jump that you're making.
Well, no, but that's what I'm saying is, how are you going to be discovered? So if you look at linear, where you used to be discovered, that's already gone, right? That's decreasing. We're eliminating that. So basically now you have to have a podcast. You have to create your own content in order to be discovered. And now if you're basically saying, well, why do we need young talent if we can just take the talent that has already existed and use them? So now it's even harder because we're already eliminating local TV. We're eliminating local radio. It's basically incumbent upon young people, young talent, aspiring talent to create everything themselves.
But like, how relevant is Al Michaels going to be in like 10 years? Like, he's relevant to you guys. You guys are a little bit older than me. He's relevant to you guys, but like in 10 years, is he going to be relevant to younger people? And I feel like, you know, it could be like athletes coming out of, you know, the NFL, or athletes coming out of like other sports that are going to kind of jump into those positions, or, you know, they're going to look for new voices. I don't think it's going to be, I think it's just extending his career a little bit. I don't think it's going to be forever. It can't be, because it's just like, it's just going to be some voice to younger kids.
I think you'll be able to pick and choose, hopefully, the voice you want to hear.
I'd love to hear Morgan Freeman, you know, with recaps on sports. It'd be
sports.
awesome.
Right.
Do sports.
Well, I mean, even just for, let's go to like college football. If you could listen to a modern game in the voice of Keith Jackson, right, from like, you know, way back when,
from
or
when
if
we
you
were
could listen to an NFL game that was
right.
Yeah, that was voiced over with like John Madden. So right now, I think the concept of entertainment is shifting, right? So you've got, you know, it used to just be about the game. You'd watch the game, you'd have your broadcasters, right? And you're kind of stuck with whoever you have it. And being in Cincinnati, we would be like a secondary market. You wouldn't get the, you know, quote unquote, the you know, the cream of the crop when it comes to broadcasting. And yes, people that has elevated over the last few years of who you get to like call the games. But you also have Manning Cast, which is, you can go to ESPN and listen to the Manning brothers talk about it and provide a different layer of commentary over top of it. I think this is all going to come down to what people want as a part of their entertainment experience. So I think this is just another layer on top of that, of like, well, what if I could select this personality to, you know, broadcast the game to me? I think that's super interesting. And I think the, you know, quote unquote, the consumer is going to drive a lot of this behavior. It's up to networks to be able to innovate and come up with new formats. So I think they have the opportunity to do a lot of these things. I think, you know, experimenting in all these different entertainment experiences for people, I think, are interesting. How do new people get discovered? I think new people have always been figuring out a way to get discovered. I think the tools might change, the venues might change, the channels might change, but it's still going to be up to them to break through. And I think they also will have the tools now to create their own networks, which they're already starting to do on other platforms.
So related to that, Instagram has started to let some of their creators make AI versions of themselves. So they're launching this AI studio tool as an early test. Zuckerberg announced this last week on Thursday. And as part of the test, you might see, like this week, I think you might see some of your favorite creators, their voice. And it's kind of more, I think we talked about it, it's like more in chat or messaging form right now. And it's going to be labeled as AI, but, you can, DM someone on Instagram, one of your creators, and they can send you some messages back. Kind of related to the stuff that we're doing, but curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a no-brainer for them to explore, and feels like conversations are going to become the new ad format in a way. So,
Yeah.
it would, knowing that their revenue is all generated through selling ads. I wouldn't say all of it, but a majority of their
A
revenue.
lot of it. Yeah.
I think conversations, and especially around like AI conversations, are going to be the new ad channel, and so they need to get in quickly to put it out there for people. So, it is, I think in the future, I mean, there's a lot of data to support the role of AI influencers, just being able to distribute or create content and distribute it out and personalize it to people. And chat is kind of the natural next step to do that.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, we're doing something similar yet completely different, where we want we want you to be able to create your own agent of yourself, but also define the spaces you want to play and not play, and then how you might be able to collaborate with brands using your agent.
So not just influencers, not just kind of, or micro influencers or people that are, have a ton of followers.
No. I mean, I want to collaborate with many, many brands. So, but I think really putting you, the user, in the center of this whole experience, I think is really important for us. And also protecting all of your data is extremely important. Those are the decisions and ways that we're operating that I think are fundamentally different from what maybe like a Meta is doing or what they're trying to do.
Well, more to come there. And next week's going to be pretty exciting. We're going to be launching, we're going to be sharing something new next week as it relates to the creator agents. More to come next week. But let's get to our interview with Kjell De Orr. He's a seasoned expert in insights and strategy. He's going to be sharing his journey from managing supermarkets in Sweden to leading innovative AI and health tech projects in Miami. We're also going to be talking about the future of AI in healthcare and how Miami is becoming a hub for sustainable solutions. You ready?
I'm ready. Let's go.
Hi, Kjell. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. Pleasure being here.
We would love to hear a bit about you before we get into kind of more questions. Love to hear about your background and some of the projects that you're focused on right now.
Okay, so my background, I've got about 20 years or so of insights and strategy. As a kid, I started out in retail and supermarkets. So I would be working extra in supermarkets.
Like bagging or working shelves?
No, they were great because I was doing everything from understanding what inventory costs and looks like, and how you manage that, to accounting, to pricing of products and layout of stores, and what captures customers' imagination, and where to put those candy treats by the checkout counter. Why is that? Why is that such a good location?
Just for Sarah. Just for Sarah.
For Sarah. There you go, Chad. So all these things, they trained me. I took courses in the summer when I was doing summer work there and so on, and I loved it. And they made me a partner straight out of high school. They said, don't go to uni just yet. Come in here and help us run one of our supermarkets, and you'll be made a partner here. So there I was, like 17, 18, going 18, managing 60-year-olds and how to do their job, and the meat counter and fresh meat produce and dairy, to negotiating pricing with all the other canned foods or whatever it was, right? So had a lot of fun. That's where I started, and that's really where I got into this. How do people actually buy stuff and think about buying stuff, and what's going on in their mind, and how can you tease that with that great smell of fresh baked bread coming through, or the candy at the checkout, or all those green apples just as you walk in, all that color hitting you. How hungry are you now, Chad?
Yeah. Well, Shell, where is this place? Like, what city are we in?
We are in south of Stockholm, in
Okay.
Sweden. So that's where I started, and then mandatory military service in Sweden meant I went and did a officers training in Sweden in the Swedish Marines. Found that really interesting, but you know what? When you wake up every morning and you're not even allowed to make the choice of what to wear. There's a uniform, how to wear it. Everything is decided for you. I got a bit tired of that, so I went back to uni, did my MBA in finance, did my MBA in marketing, and went straight into finance, and was too early really for my first job, I think. Looking back, I scratch my head, how the heck did that happen? But there you go. So I was managing pretty big companies in real estate development, and I was the finance guy. Then, just to date myself a little bit, a chappie called George Soros was playing with currencies at the time, and he crushed some currencies, UK and so on. He came for us. We were sitting ducks in the Nordics, and Black Friday, if you remember. So, yep, that was me for the next year, firing people, age 26. Hating it. Yeah, it was not fun. It was fun scaling it up. It was not much fun letting go of so many good people for no reason of their own. And so I jumped into market research by coincidence and joined what is now Kantar Group, used to be part of WPP. Did that for a couple of years, and then got transferred to the UK office, where they had some ideas for what I should help them expand before I was allowed, quote unquote, to within the network transfer back to Africa. I grew up in Zambia, by the way. So for me, it was really cool to have a network where I could go back into Africa and work there. I got appetite for working in London and stayed there for 15 years instead of 1 year, which was the plan. Yeah, stayed with WPP, loved it. Worked opening the Research International at the time and the day, and part of Kantar now, their global tech practice. Had some early wins with just being in the right place at the right time by luck. Mobile phones were taking off. I was intrigued. I thought, surely this is something. As it so happens sometimes, when you're in the right place and it just takes off, you happen to know a little bit more than anyone else, and that suddenly makes you an expert. And you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, really? I'm an expert? I don't know everything I should know. But it turns out you know much more than the guy next to you.
So what brought you to the US?
So 2010, I was out in Australia running my own agency in Melbourne. And two things happened. First, personal, actually very personal. My wife and I adopted two British kids, and we realized that nobody's going to drop by for a pint of lager after work when you're out in Melbourne. And our family was in Europe. So quick realization when this came through that, oops, we need to rethink geography a little bit. Just coincidence, an old work friend was calling and an old client was calling me at the same time that this was taking place, and said, you got to come to the US and work for us in this Brazilian setup. It's a big Brazilian group. We're buying companies in the US, but we haven't got a CEO in place. And they were talking to me without knowing the other was talking at the same time. And I trusted both. So it was a quick and easy one. Why Miami, you'd ask? Well, upstate New York seemed pretty cold to me. I'm Swedish, so I know what that looks like. Been there, done that. We had an office in DC, which sounded great, but office in Miami sounded good for a dad of 2 new kids. That sounded like a safer place.
Can you tell us about Seven Bridges Group and the types of projects you're working on?
Seven Bridges came out of an initial, and this has happened throughout my working career, that I talked to some bright people, ambitious people that have really a desire to do something big and bold, and they get going and they disappear. We keep in touch, and suddenly they reappear and say, okay, you told us to do this, we've done it, and now it's rolling, and it's kind of not something that we can manage on our own. So now you have to step back in and help us out. And of course, that's the best job ever, right? You're working with smart people that are really doing new stuff and so on, and they're open to test the new approaches that you're looking at. The idea was that we would focus on AI in health and wellness. We would build companies and spin them off as an economic development play for the county, together with enterprise and the local government, and of course, MIT and other academia that we have here in Florida. So build that ecosystem of AI in health and wellness and grow that. Seven Bridges also has a venture lab built in as well now. And it's funny because corporate venturing is just such a hot space nowadays. And we've been doing it for quite a while without knowing it had a name. We just called it building companies, frankly, as simple as that. And somebody was just a couple of years ago, I was talking, a German colleague was telling me about corporate venturing. And I was like, oh, what is that? Explain to me. And then he said, I said, oh, okay. Oh, is that what we've been doing? Oh, it's got a name. Okay, let's call it that.
And so I wonder if you could share a little bit more about the co-creation lab. So Sarah and I have been kind of hot on co-creation for the last decade, which is kind of, a process of bringing, not necessarily like minds, but just bringing minds together to solve a problem. And just curious how, what types of projects are in the lab right now or have gone through that would be a good kind of use case to share with everybody.
We have the more specific ones, which are really problem solving, for example, for big public healthcare systems. So, what is it they're struggling with, and how can we pinpoint one or two solutions that we can go in and help using AI? And it can be simple stuff or simpler stuff. Sepsis detection. How can you use AI for that? To more complex asks, for example, how do you forecast what a public health system needs to be prepared for in terms of its patient population and when that outbreak takes place?
Yeah, can you share a little bit more about how you might approach that problem?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting one. It's a real one, actually. Yeah. And we had that question asked, and for us, we went back to the drawing board and said, so who uses the public health system and what's the profile look like? And we found that quite a big majority of the people were coming from low-income housing. So then we went to the low-income housing and said, okay, how do we engage and collect information, health information from this particular segment? And the idea came up with building, with our engineering capability, sensors inside the low-income housing that would collect data. seamlessly. Something that's really seamless in the floors, behind the mirrors, in the sheets, in the mattresses, and so on, and just collects that data, obviously with consent, and obviously that's your data. And if you want to share that data, you should have some upside for that, but obviously totally anonymized. If you can also build the future home a little bit more forward thinking. At the time, we had a brilliant guy leading this initiative who was reminding us that housing has looked the same forever. When it started as a cave, it had more or less four walls and floor and a roof, and it was static. But the idea of, as we evolve and as we are different people moving in and out of a house, how come that house should remain the same for everyone? One t-shirt fits all. I have, for example, I may have some walking disabilities, or I might find it that my particular appetite for staying in the kitchen is much bigger than anyone else. So I'd want to have my whole entire room in my kitchen, maybe, and spend more time there. And how does that housing allow us to adapt according to the needs of the tenant, but also as I evolve? If I live in the same apartment over 15 years, my health condition might change and my needs will change, and therefore the home should change with that. So how can we adapt for that? And that's really where we were working with School of Architecture at MIT and so on, where the Media Lab, as you might know them for, and so on, to really figure out collecting data, but also adapting living and housing to the actual person and the health as well.
If I'm understanding correctly, you've essentially like outfit a home, like Fitbits everywhere. I know that's not the exact words, but just kind of like putting these sensors through, like my space, right? My own home, and then potentially in shared spaces, right? So you've got kind of this multi-dimensional data set of like how I'm living versus my neighbor and different floors. And then are there other sensors that are a little bit more qualitative, where I'm getting like that interview from you around like, hey, this is how I'm living? Or is it just based off of where Kjell is standing? You're always in the kitchen, Kjell. What are you doing? Or is it more just like, here's kind of like who I'm in the home with, and here's how we're living together? And that might be different when, a child leaves the home.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, I mean, it's amazing how much data we can collect on each other using pretty simple technology. But if we venture into a little bit more of the imaginative adaptations of using technology today, we get a lot of qualitative data, of course. And it reminds me, if I may digress for a minute, I was involved in addiction clinics in the Boston area many years ago, and we were designing the future of addiction clinics. And the idea was, why should they be stigmatized locations that you kind of hide walking towards, and you don't want to be seen walking into? It's not something you feel proud about, and you walk in and they look pretty dreary as you walk in, and so on. And we thought, why don't we just make it really prime locations, something that's really welcoming when you walk in, something that has a lot of interesting objects to associate with and relax the individual walking in, and then picking up a lot of information. And just a simple thing as voice intonations. I was early on, probably a decade ago, playing with how does voice reveal how you feel. And if you can use AI, which we did back then, and today is much more advanced, but just facial recognition. What do you look like today? Do you look furrowed and worried, or are you looking happy and open face and so on? Together with your voice, together with the way you walk as you come in, together with how you move, and where you stand in the room and so on, even before you come to your session, we have that nailed down. So I don't have to start with, so Chad, how are you feeling today? And then tick those boxes. I already know. I'll ask you the question to see what you answer me, but I can pretty much tell how you're feeling. And that's the qualitative data that we can pick up on so easily, right? Simple things like, you see how much time I'm spending in the kitchen and what I'm doing in the kitchen. What am I doing? Am I making food all the time, eating, or am I sitting reading and using that as my quiet space, and so on and so on. So if you multiply low-income housing here in Miami-Dade County, we had the first project that we talked to the county about, 19,000 units. That's a lot of data. And then you build on that, and it starts snowballing, and you have a lot of data. And Chad, better than anyone. Once you have the data, what do you do with it?
Tell stories.
Absolutely.
Right? So what were some of the big insights that were kind of coming out of this that, opened people's eyes to what was happening? Because you were collecting a lot of data. It was behind closed doors, and I'm sure it had a lot of potential applications.
A lot of potential applications. And I think that what is one of those things that I'm passionate about is, how can you use technology in bettering people's lives, our lives, and that goes from mental well-being, or I was talking about the addiction clinics and so on, to just being at home and preparing the public healthcare systems for whatever might be coming their way, right? We had the pandemic, and if we'd had a little bit more of these kind of systems in place, we would at least have had a much better chance earlier on to know what's coming and start looking closer at this. But nobody has these kind of macro systems in place. And with the scale of these pandemics, when they happen, it becomes, pardon my French, but it becomes a shit show very quickly, right? You're on the back foot, you're panicking, you're trying to backfill, you're trying to source, we all saw what happened. Simple things, that masks, we were outbidding each other, we were panicking, we were trying to figure out how to get these simple materials and so on. And that's what we're really trying to look at with these kind of macro solutions, because as these big systems start getting off the rails and off the tracks, the consequences are so big.
And were these insights that are coming out of the lab, and did they have particular stakeholders, like with healthcare systems or hospitals, and I guess what kinds of solutions are coming out of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of learning. I mean, I think that the main reason, to answer that, the main reason we focused on AI in health and wellness was that, you have places like Boston and San Diego and so on. They've been doing biotech for how long? So we're not going to contribute something new, but using AI and a patient population that's vastly different from the standard patient population that is being analyzed in the US. We have that here. So we have a micro representation of LATAM better than anywhere else in the world here in South Florida. We're also, with US Hispanic, fastest growing patient population. So, if you look at what the demographics of a patient looks like in the next 10 to 15 years, you have your answer right here. And we have precision medicine coming on finally and making some inroads. We've talked about it for ages. We haven't really seen it. But if we're talking about precision medicine, we have the African Caribbean representation here, we have LATAM, and of course the US. All of those three populations perfectly represented here. So for us, it was a no-brainer to place ourselves here in Miami for that reason. Future forward-looking, seeing where this is going to end. It turns out that data sets are very difficult to come by. They're not readily available. When it comes to patient data, everyone gets very nervous and doesn't really know how to share. And I think that's one of our biggest challenges, to be able to use the data that's available today. And nobody really has a clear idea on how to share that data. So instead of being used, it's being sat on.
Is it because the data is protected by the patients don't want to give up that data?
No.
No, they want to give that. Okay.
It's not really about that. It's that big fear of liability from somewhere where we don't know. So therefore, let's just keep it the way it is. Because if we move in one or other direction, it might unlock a liability that we weren't clear about. So it's partly that, but it's partly also the fear of giving competition something that they didn't have.
Gotcha.
And that's a very sensitive one. So, I respect that. It took us about 2 years to negotiate how to actually structure a company. Even before starting, how would that company look like and so on? What would that entail? And a lot of that is the simple fact that how do you value the patient data you sit on?
Well, Shel, do you have to put it into action? Like, even if it's using the initial data set, but then creating a synthetic kind of world with fictitious people, but still with the same, anonymized problems. And these are future scenarios. I mean, isn't that a scenario to get people
Absolutely.
off their butts?
Yeah. No.
You know what I mean?
You're absolutely right, Chad, and it's happening now as we speak. I mean, there's, synthetic data is really something that the industry in health is looking at carefully and playing with and testing out and so on. Digital twin systems, biomimetic solutions, and dark data.
Yeah. So who's gonna come out as a winner in those scenarios? I mean, obviously we want the general public, as a winner in this, but you have all these different stakeholders at play, and I guess who's leading the way?
If you'd asked me 10 years ago when I was working with all the stakeholders, I would say that it was the big pharma that was leading the way. AI has disrupted that. Big pharma are really trying to figure out today what AI means to them, how to minimize the threat to them and their structures, and how to ramp up and include AI into their DNA as they keep on running, moving forward. And it's complicated. I mean, it's not straightforward for these big companies to change such a fundamental way of doing things, suddenly using technology and data points. And it's a whole new set of talent that they're recruiting. So I think, to answer your question, Chad, who's leading the way today? It's disruptors. It's pretty small, innovative companies that started out using AI as the fundamental building blocks of building health solutions. It could be drug discovery, for example. A couple of years ago, drug discovery entirely made on AI platforms and using AI and synthetic data and so on and so on would have been pretty out there in terms of imagination. It's happening already, and these are the type of companies that are being acquired as we speak. This year so far, more mergers and acquisitions in big pharma than or in biotech than you've seen any time before. Why is that? Well, everyone's trying to buy their way back into leading the way, to answer your question. And it's going to be a very interesting year for acquisitions and mergers when it comes to AI solutions and who gets to buy them first. It used to be that the outliers at the time, looking at health, for example, Google Health and so on, they were the big data guys playing around in this space. Well, they're dwarfed by what's happening right now. And so it's heating up.
Yeah. I mean, NVIDIA is an interesting one because they could go also downstream into the consumer markets and create
Absolutely.
the chips that I wear a bracelet or something, and it's taking my data and also controlling the data centers of
course,
all the Gen AI companies.
I think we're just into that cusp of real disruption in health and tech, how those two marry each other. And you have the outliers again, like Elon Musk and so on, where he's working a lot with sensors built in and so on. And I think he's onto something, but it's a complex area. I mean, it's fascinating to me that how little we know about things like our human brain and how that works.
So I want to shift gears just a little bit. I mean, we're kind of circling the space, but I want to talk a little bit about Miami, because Miami is definitely an emerging tech hub. Cryptocurrency, hear a lot about that coming out of Miami. But I want to talk about kind of what excites you about the work that's being done in AI right now down there. It could be through the work that you're doing, but also, friends, partners, so on.
Seven Bridges, as I've been talking, we've been very health focused, but we're also in deep tech and green tech, and bringing Nordic companies and EU companies over to the US and so on. And it's interesting for me from a personal point of view to work in sustainability, but Miami has a footprint in sustainability, which is not necessarily something we're proud of, but we are ground zero pretty much for global rising water levels, right? So how do you build a sustainable city, health systems? How does rising water levels affect our health moving forward? In what ways and so on? We have that here happening in Miami and South Florida, whether we like it or not. Weather patterns this year, we're expecting one heck of a storm season. Hurricane season officially already started. El Nino is heating up the waters more than we've seen before, and it's hotter than it has been before. We're already seeing heat warnings and so on, and it's just June. So we'll see where that ends. But we've been using AI in predicting the storm patterns as well. We work with that, and I think that's fascinating. The White House has nominated Miami as a sandbox for sustainable solutions, and is providing federal funding for us to build out different solutions and see.
Can you explain what that means to be? Because it's your regulatory sandbox in the Miami-Dade area. Can you explain what that is and what that means?
So in short, it means that there are, I think, 31 different hubs, R&D hubs throughout the U.S. that the White House is supporting through funding, but also through other initiatives. It ranges from EV solutions and so on and so on. Sustainability is such a broad box to play with, but we have been assigned that box here in Miami. It means that we are getting quite a bit of federal funding to start looking at solutions that we can test out, build out and test out here in South Florida, but not only for us, thinking about the US as a whole, because we're all kind of looking at global warming, and that global warming solution, to a large extent, will have common threads throughout. It's getting hotter or colder and so on. We have to build different solutions for our citizens here in the US. And what does that look like for kids in school to elderly and their healthcare and so on? How do we grow food? How do we process that food? How can we store that food, given that everything is changing? It's not just heat and water, it's storms and so on and so on. And that's just us here. So you've seen what it looked like earlier this year in Texas and California, and last year with the fires. And so, I mean, how do you build for a sustainable living future?
So is AI part of the solution, Chad?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Chad. Of course.
How, I know you might see it. So how can we attract more people to see it?
Well, I mean, it's everything from agri-tech, right? So let's start with what we eat in the mornings, and how AI is prolific there. At the moment, we've seen a lot of companies, a lot of interest in looking at how to expand on crop management. Also looking at weather patterns and using AI to maximize our crops. And I mean, what is not working when the crops are lower yield than anticipated? How can we prevent that before it happens? I mean, there's so many AI solutions, not just drone solutions that get a lot of publicity, but just looking at how to use AI in that space, how to build houses. I mean, the housing, where to build it, and what materials to source and use, and so on. I mean, we're using AI everywhere all the time right now.
Right.
We couldn't do this without.
And what do you see happening on the consumer side of AI? Like, a lot of the solutions you talked about are definitely much more commercial kind of applications, and then you have Apple a couple weeks ago launch kind of their Apple Intelligence, and I think for some people it was an interesting approach of how or what consumer AI looks like beyond Siri and Alexa and those kinds of applications, or like your robot vacuum cleaner that goes around your house.
Right.
Their idea, like in the consumer world of AI, might be, is it different? Is it fundamentally different than the commercial side? Where do you see, what's the bridge to your 7 bridges? I don't know if we can add an 8th, but like, what's the bridge from the commercial side to the consumer side to get people, how might they use AI? Because obviously there's a lot more people than there are of companies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an interesting question, because I think that as we are so vastly empowered just in the last year with technology and AI, we can do so much more just in our work desk and normal workday using AI ourselves. Mm-hmm. How we apply that, and it's interesting because you see how we apply that depending on our personalities and our interests and so on. If you ask my son, who's just turning 18, he will use AI all the time, but not necessarily the way I would use it in my work and so on and in my day. But I think that when we had many years ago the transition into a digital economy, we were suddenly empowered to ourselves create a company. We could suddenly, through digital means, have a website. We could have a transaction online. We could start creating a company in our living room on our own. And that was unheard of, right?
Yeah.
And this leap with AI is just an additional step, a bigger step, I would say, where you can use that technology boost that we're all given right now. You can, with $50 a month of subscription fees, suddenly be totally empowered to start building your own company
Yeah.
that couldn't be built out before in a similar way.
So is the home the future of the hospital?
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about that. I think that this is what we're seeing and preparing and building for moving forward. It's interesting that it's almost the upside down from trickle down effect that we normally see in technology is when we started toying around with low income housing solutions and so on. The first thing that happened was that the big construction companies were knocking on our door and saying,
Mm-hmm.
what you're building here is an ultra premium product for our ultra premium segment that would pay a lot for what you're building here. And of course, we're a nonprofit. We're looking at this like, well, we don't really care to build for the 1%. We're looking to build for the 99. So that's really where our focus is. But it's definitely taking place in a disruptive way with AI as leading that disruption, and your traditional trickle down does not apply here. You can use AI in a cost effective way to build a future home.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the trickle down where we wait 15 years for the 99% of human mankind to benefit from that. It's actually happening the other way around as we speak.
Well, this is awesome, Kjell. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Kjell.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you.
Well, that was a great interview with Kjell. And that's going to do it for this episode of AI Powered by People. The show is produced by Steve Berkowitz and brought to you by Verve. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Tuesday.